Okay, I want to do a quick video on red flags and tells at companies. What sort of struck me or caught my attention was the other day, Moderna's CFO retired kind of unexpectedly, and that's an interesting type of red flag. But I don't want to speak specifically about Moderna. I want to speak more about red flags in general that investors should look for that may indicate that not all is as it seems, that it may sort of indicate to you as an investor, if you're an investor in a company that shows one of these red flags, shows one of these tells, that you want to look a little more deeply into what's going on. Okay, so the whole idea is to protect you from loss, to protect you from impairments to your capital. And also, these red flags, they're just red flags, right? They're not proof. Just because a CFO resigns unexpectedly at a company doesn't mean that the whole organization is a sham organization. This is not what I'm saying. It's an indicator that you should look a little more deeply into what's going on. And then also, I guess as backdrop, if you think about a scam organization or some fraudulent organization, they don't just come out and say, "Hey, everybody, we're a scam," right? They're going to present themselves as a legitimate organization and do what they can to make themselves seem as legitimate as possible, right? So there's a little bit of a game of poker sometimes between entities, companies, and the investors to try to identify what really is going on and what companies can do to kind of make things appear in a way that's maybe better than they actually are. Okay, so the red flags are just a sign, a cue for you to look more deeply. Okay, so the key red flags that I look for, one of the biggest ones is when the CFO resigns unexpectedly. And this is what happened with Moderna just the other day. What you want to see with a company is a proper CFO transition, a proper movement from one chief financial officer to the next over a period of time that is well telegraphed by the company. Often you want to see the CFO, spend, say, a number of quarters or potentially a full year in helping ensure a good transition where they promote the next person from within the organization or bring in someone who's very well qualified from outside. Okay, so when you have a sudden change in CFO, that's a tell. That's kind of a bad sign, and it may indicate malfeasance with accounting or aggressive accounting techniques, for example. It may not. It's just, again, you want to look a little more deeply. Another thing to look at as a red flag is when a CFO has been at a company for a very brief time period, say a few months or a few quarters. When a CFO comes in, maybe he's new to the organization, he gets maybe a good look at what's going on, and then suddenly leaves. That's a very, very big red flag. Okay, so again, this is sort of a subcategory of a CFO resigning. But if somebody comes and is after a few months or 6 months suddenly leaves the CFO post, that's a bad sign. All right. Another thing to think about as a red flag is when a company changes auditors. And there's some nuance with this particular red flag because sometimes it's actually not a red flag. What you want to see is a company, again, telegraphing its decisions with which auditor it uses. Often there's usually a proxy vote, like they'll ask shareholders to vote on a decision about retaining an auditor or not. And it actually is a good policy over some periodicity for a company to change auditors, to move from one major auditing firm to another so that a new firm can come in, start from ground zero, and get a good sense of all the accounting conventions a company uses and sort of reapprove everything. Kind of, you want to make sure that if you use the same auditor for forever, you can sometimes get shenanigans done and the auditor doesn't really catch it, or it may not be kind of evaluated with the same fine-tooth comb that bringing in a new auditor would enable. So this is one instance where changing an auditor can be a good thing, but it should be telegraphed by the company. A red flag happens when there's a sudden change of auditor or when an auditor decides it can't verify the financials of a company. That's a very bad sign. Or if a company goes from a very well-known auditor to a no-name auditor. That's another kind of red flag that you want to pay attention to. And then all of these things kind of can be indicators of a third red flag, which is accounting restatements or aggressive accounting actions taken by a company. And what do I mean by aggressive accounting? Well, here's where, if you're sort of a new investor or an intermediate investor, you're going to want to get more conversant in accounting, how to read accounting statements. I recommend actually most people should be taking 1 or 2 semesters of managerial accounting, at a community college or some online course, just to get conversant in ways accounting can be used to mask or cover up reality or to show reality. And there's a lot of judgment calls made in accounting for how you book revenues, how you book receivables, how you grade your inventory, different ways to look at your cost structure, and whether costs can be expensed or capitalized. There's lots of nuance here, and changes in accounting or restatements of accounting indicate that maybe something you did before wasn't appropriate, and that's another red flag that indicates that you should look deeper into the situation. So we talked about these are 3 things. Now let's keep going with what companies do when there are allegations of accounting shenanigans. If you look back to, say, WorldCom or Enron or Theranos, some of the more high-profile fraudulent situations, there had been allegations for a long time period in front of all 3 of these, the exposure of all 3 of these frauds. And that tends to be the rule. You get a whiff of something not quite right. Maybe there's some media story that shows up that alleges something, or you might have a well-known short seller that makes allegations that this company's being aggressive with their accounting. When you hear those allegations, that's a red flag. You want to look deeper into the company and consider that these allegations might be true, that they might be worth pursuing. And then secondarily, you want to look at what is management's response to these allegations. What you want to see is management being very candid and very open. Okay, we'll take these into account. We'd like to show that they're not true. And maybe they even give a presentation to make their case. And that they don't hide away from these allegations. But then also you want to make sure that the company is not over defensive in the face of allegations. So you see certain instances where a company might go after short sellers, actually try to smear them in the media, or argue that that they're wrong and not really give substantive arguments, but actually just go at that person's reputation, maybe ad hominem. And so when you see over-promotional or over-defensive management in the face of allegations, that's a tell. And that means look deeper, consider that maybe there's more risk in this investment than you realize, and to take action accordingly. Okay? So these are red flags to look at. Again, they're not guarantees that there are bad things happening. They're just red flags, right? It means look more deeply. It's not proof of anything. It's just something to look into and to be a little bit more, put on your cynicism hat and be a little bit more careful where you're putting your capital so that you and your family's capital is not impaired. Okay? So that's it for today. As always, thanks for watching.